Let's move on to standard 3, which is duties to clients and prospective clients. And when we look at the standards of professional conduct, of course there's 7 of them, right? We started with professionalism, and now we're into duties to clients, and we're going to have we'll have 4 more after this. I actually think this one maybe stands out a little bit in terms of importance. So if you think about what CFAI is trying to accomplish within the industry, they are, I think appropriately, self-appointed stewards of the reputation of the industry, and I think they take on and perform in that role admirably. Okay, but if you want to protect the image of the industry or the reputation, the idea of public trust, which trust is a big thing in the finance community, then the quickest way to ruin that, okay, is not to have a problem between an employee and an employer, right? The quickest way to do that, or an employee and a firm and a regulator, the quickest way to do that is to have a client harmed, right? So I think that the duties to clients and prospective clients, because it's really important in terms of protecting the reputation of the industry, it's key to what we're trying to accomplish. I think this might be worth spending just a little bit of extra time on, right? So anyway, and I'm thinking of that from a test taking and test prep perspective, as well as from the personal perspective of, hey, I'm supposed to adhere to this code and standards because I've written out something that says I'm going to, right? All right, so standard 3, duty to clients and prospective clients. Part A here is loyalty, prudence, and care. Okay, and what this is telling me is that I have a duty of loyalty to my clients. Okay, that is, I have to act with reasonable care and exercise prudent judgment. Okay, I've got to act for the benefit of clients and place their interests before those of my employer or myself. Right, so the client comes first. Right, so we've got to go through, determine, and comply with any applicable fiduciary duty, right? So we have this, what is a fiduciary duty? Well, fiduciary duty is actually poorly defined within, well, I guess maybe it's just a word that's difficult to precisely define, but the idea is this. If I'm going to sell you a product, and it's an arm's length transaction, then I have responsibilities maybe to disclose known defects or something like that. So if I'm going to sell you my pickup truck, well, that is a normal transaction between people who are normally interested, buyers on the buy side, sellers on the sell side. There's no fiduciary relationship there, right? I still have a responsibility not to misrepresent and all that sort of stuff. Okay? A fiduciary duty implies a higher standard of loyalty than does a simple market transaction. So I am, again, if I'm thinking of this as I am a portfolio manager and I have discretionary authority over the portfolio of an unsophisticated investor. That's my base case scenario for thinking of what would be the lowest threshold for whether or not there has been a violation. Okay, well, along that fiduciary line, okay, I have the responsibility, I have a debt of loyalty or a duty of loyalty to my clients that significantly exceeds those from a normal arm's length transaction, right? So there's no caveat emptor, buyer beware, that type of stuff. I am supposed to act for the benefit of my client. And I told you that I think there are 3 pillars that are associated with the ethics material. And the first pillar is, in my mind, it's a combination of this idea of loyalty, okay, and then this idea of objectivity. Okay. So I put 2 standards together here, or 2 substandards, okay, but we have to be objective in our decision making, and then we have to understand and adhere to our fiduciary responsibilities, and those things are inseparable, right? You can't be loyal if you're not objective, okay, and objectivity without loyalty is not going to benefit anyone. So in terms of pillar 1, okay, this loyalty and objectivity, that has to be the the foundational characteristic of my dealing with clients, right? So what we're going to see is that this is going to be pillar number 1. We're also going to have pillars 2 and 3, and then if you put them together, I think that gives you a good skeleton or framework for how to think about investment actions, recommendations, those types of things. But this is probably the most important one, the one that's maybe the most difficult to accomplish, in fact. Okay, but we're going to see 2 more of those, and I don't bring them up as a way to preach about what I think is important. I bring it up as a way to think about the ethics material and how it relates to how all these things interrelate, so that I can address questions on the exam. I think in the real world, this is in fact true. We have to have both of these things working, and the other 2 things I think are going to be fundamental as well. But again, I'm not preaching. I just think this is a good way to characterize the material so that when I read a question, okay, and my problem in reading ethics questions is that I look at the answers and they all look right or they all look wrong, or at least that's what happens when you start studying this material. So you've got to be able to go through and think about what is it that constitutes ethical behavior, and if you can put these 3 pillars together, I think that actually helps a little bit. So we've got to understand, we've got to determine and comply with our fiduciary duty. Okay, we have a debt of loyalty to our clients. What about guidance? Okay, so again, we have to act in the client's best interest. Okay, and that means we exercise prudence, care, skill, and diligence that a person familiar with such matters would use. So, and this implies that if we don't have the skill associated with this, so we're managing a portfolio for, an unsophisticated client, and for whatever reason there needs to be some sort of derivatives overlay in order to protect their interest. We don't know much about derivatives. Okay, well then we have to have the prudence in that position to know when we need to bring in additional expert help. So we either have the skill ourselves, or we go out and acquire it. Okay, we have to be diligent. We have to act in the client's best interest. So of course we already talked about following applicable fiduciary duty. This goes back to the idea again of professionalism in terms of gifts. Well, gifts along the lines of fiduciary responsibility versus along the lines of a third-party transaction. Those are very different things. Okay, the client may be the investing public. So if we are, an analyst or fund manager at a mutual fund, well, the client is the investing public. We have a fiduciary responsibility to do what is in their best interest. So if you're managing pools of client assets, you have to manage them according to the governing docs. So this relates to the investment policy statement that we've talked about a little bit at level 1. It's also in level 2, and there's a big dose of it at level 3. There needs to be a governing document for all of this type of investing activity, and if we're managing client money, we've got to adhere to those documents. Okay, also still in guidance, means this is all required. Okay, that when we make decisions or recommendations, we do it in a total portfolio context. So again, it's not the risk return of an individual asset. It's the contribution of the asset to the risk-return characteristics of the portfolio that matters. All right. So we're doing this total portfolio view, and we of course, that means we bring in the idea of modern portfolio theory. We understand the principles of diversification, okay, and we make this with a view to the benefit of the client in a portfolio context. What about proxy voting? Well, all right. So if you are a mutual fund manager, and you get all these proxy notices. Okay, well, an easy thing to do would be to say, well, we don't vote proxies, we just choose good assets. That's our job, so we're ignoring all. Well, you can't do that. Okay, if you are holding the securities, okay, you are the one that gets the proxy notices, then you have to vote the proxies. Okay, and you have to vote them, okay, for the benefit of the clients. Everything you do has got to be for the benefit of the clients, okay, and that includes voting proxies. Soft dollar standards, so the soft dollar standards, basically that soft dollars have to benefit the client. So as a quick review, soft dollars are what comes back in a brokerage relationship. So I've got a big portfolio I'm managing. I send lots of trade activity to a particular broker. Well, the broker then gives me something back. Okay, well, I'm paying them. The way I pay for those brokerage services is by using client money. Right? So I'm paying for those brokerage services with client money. So anything that I get back those are soft dollars. It could be The reason it's called soft dollars is because it could be research support, right? Or something else along those lines. It's not cash, okay, but it's something of value. Okay, that has to be for the benefit of the client. So if he says, well, you've spent I don't know, $12 million executing trades with me this year, okay, and here I'm going to give you $1 million back. That's not soft dollars, that's a bribe, okay, so that would clearly be illegal. It would be a violation of the gift thing, okay, but soft dollars that do come back, well, that's got to be something that is received and then utilized for the benefit of the client, right? So in terms of recommended procedures, okay, of course, we're going to have to follow rules and laws, right? So loyalty doesn't require us to break the law. We need to establish client investment objectives. So remember, objectives come in with two dimensions, that is risk objectives, or you can also think of that as risk tolerance, okay, and return objectives. Okay, we have as an ethical responsibility, okay, the notion that we have to have a diversified portfolio. So diversification is not just a nice economic thing, it's an ethical responsibility. We're going to deal fairly with clients, and when we deal fairly with all of our clients, when we're taking investment actions or when we're making recommendations. And we're going to disclose all possible conflicts of interest. We're actually going to get to talk about that more in detail later, so I'll let that go for now, but those are all the things that are recommended that we do, as well as these. That is, of course, we're going to vote proxies. We're going to vote them for the benefit of the ultimate beneficiary. Okay, we're going to keep client information confidential. This also comes up elsewhere in the code and standards, but as part of our duty of loyalty, well, we have access to confidential personal information or private information if it's some entity other than an individual. Okay, well, we are responsible for making sure that it's kept confidential. Okay, when we are selecting brokers, we should be selecting based on the idea of best execution. And in general, I think this is probably not recommended procedure. It says it in the actual standard itself, and certainly in the guidance. And that is, look, we have a responsibility. We've established a relationship that has a fiduciary line of responsibility. We're being paid to do this, right? So this isn't. It would apply if we had volunteer work, but that's not the case. We're the typical case. We're paid to manage a portfolio. Okay, well, because they're paying us to look after their best interest, okay, or to make decisions that would be in the client's best interest. That's what we're supposed to do. Clients come first. Now, there's an implicit hierarchy in terms of whose needs get placed where. Okay, so we have three entities at play here. We've got, well, I guess actually we have four. We have the client, we have employers, we have ourselves, and we have the investing public. Okay, so, and we'll come to an opportunity later to sort of delineate how that would flow from one to the other. But what is clear is at the top of that hierarchy is the notion that clients' interests come first, right? So that's that would be the best single statement to characterize Standard 3 generally, our responsibility to clients. Okay, so that's 3A, loyalty, prudence, and care, part of my first of the three pillars. Okay, what about 3B? This is fair dealing. So deal fairly and objectively with all clients when you're providing investment analysis. Okay, you're making recommendations, you're taking action. Those are all portfolio things. But then whenever you're engaged in professional activities, okay, you deal fairly with all your clients. So in the professional realm, as a quick history lesson, the code and standards, if you go back a little while, 2 iterations back in the book, they tended to be much more encompassing of life in general, meaning that what you did in your private life was also, they mentioned here, that they've gotten away from that, okay? But what they have emphasized is that when you're talking about your professional responsibilities or when you act in your professional role, okay, well, essentially that it applies. So it's 24/7, okay? If you're acting as in a professional capacity, then you're subject then whatever you do in that role, okay, that's subject to the code and standards, okay? So if you've got some sort of professional activity that you're engaged in, you've got to be dealing fairly. Now, fairly doesn't imply equally, but you've got to be dealing fairly with clients and prospective clients, right? So guidance here, of course, no discrimination against any client, okay, when you're disseminating investment recommendations or taking actions, which means that you're going to disseminate a new recommendation. You're changing something from a buy to a sell. Well, you don't send it out to your 3 favorite clients on Thursday and then release it Friday morning to everybody else. Okay, so you can't discriminate against any client when you're disseminating these recommendations or when you're taking action. Action would be, making investment decisions. We'll talk directly about, restricted or hot IPOs. Okay, it's not to say that fair and equal are the same thing. Okay, so we should be, perhaps the way to think of this is you're striving for equality, right? But fairness is the standard that we're looking for. So you're dealing fairly with everyone, and you could have different levels of service. I think we'll see that on the next slide. Okay, as long as everyone's informed that there's different levels of service, well, you're treating people not equally, but it's still fair, right? Because everyone would have a chance to pay for the gold-plated service. So fairness is what we're looking for. Fairness does not imply equality. So here's the different levels of service thing. You can't disadvantage any client. So you can't say, well, these are my super premium clients and they pay me 1.5% of assets under management a year. You are my basic bread and butter clients. You only pay 50 basis points a year. But when I get hot IPOs, okay, well, I'm going to distribute those limited number of shares to my premium clients, and you're not going to get any of those, right? So you can't disadvantage a client in the course of having different levels of service, okay? But you can hold hands more. You can, give more personal attention or something along those lines, as long as you're dealing fairly with everybody. That doesn't imply equality. So if you're disseminating recommendations, well, you have to give all clients a fair chance to act on that. So I'm going to disseminate my recommendations. Okay, well, that's I've made my analysis available to everyone now. Then I can go back and say, well, all right, would you like to talk about how this would influence your portfolio to clients that are paying for higher levels of service? So, and of course, this last point here, if a client is unaware of a recommended change, so they call in, and I guess the simplest case would be you have a client that calls you and says, hey, I want you to buy me another 10,000 shares of company X. Well, you just issued a sell order, okay, or made a sell decision or a sell recommendation on company X. Okay, they didn't know about that, but they call in and say, hey, I want another 10,000 shares of company X. Okay, well, then at a minimum, what you have to do, okay, is you have to advise them that you just had a sell recommendation. So they say, well, that doesn't deter me. I think this is a buy. Well, differences of opinion. If we didn't have differences of opinion in our market or in our profession, we wouldn't be able to have markets. You've honored your responsibility to fair dealing when you tell them, hey, we recently, just yesterday or last week, put out a sell recommendation on this, and you're coming to buy it. You sure you want me to do that? Okay. Well, after that, if they still want to do it, then you can accept the order. So continuing on with the guidance for Standard 3B, fair dealing, of course the notion here, and we've said this about 10 times now, is that you treat all clients fairly. So if you're, and that includes consideration of their investment objectives and constraints, which goes back to the investment policy statement, which weaves all of these things together again. So we've got to treat people and clients and prospective clients fairly. Okay, so if we have allocation procedures, okay, which we should have for something like a hot IPO down here, hot issues. So this is something that clients would like to have more of in their portfolios. Well, we shouldn't use an ad hoc procedure, and like I say, we'll get to discuss what this might be later on. Okay, but we have some sort of system that is designed to fairly allocate shares in a hot IPO. Well, that ought to be in writing, and we ought to make that available to clients, is what that is saying. So if we have we should have fair allocation procedures. Okay, that's actually a requirement later on. Okay, here we're saying they really should be written down. Okay, and that we ought to make them available to clients, especially if they ask for them. So that's guidance in terms of recommended procedures. Okay, what about the part of the problem comes between the time that we make a decision, so we're changing a recommendation, and the time we disseminate that. Well, a couple of ways to avoid violations of fair dealing would be to do these first two things. One, limit the number of people who are aware of an upcoming change. And it's not like, I mean, these are complex processes. We've got to have the analysts do it. They've got a committee that reviews it. Then it goes through one level of review more. Not all of that can happen simultaneously, but the number of people that are actually involved and know what the change is going to be, the fewer of those people that you have that are in the know, the less chance there is that some client's going to be informed before another. And also to the extent that we can shorten the time frame. If we're making a change in a recommendation, if we decide we're going to have a recommendation, well, we have an expedited process, okay, to shorten the time frame between the decision to make a change and dissemination of that generally. Okay, pre-dissemination guidelines, that is how the firm behaves and what they do and what they say and what the employees do and say prior to dissemination of these reports. And then, of course, what we're striving for here is this idea of simultaneous dissemination. And that's not to say that that's even possible, right? I mean, there's still somebody in the world somewhere that doesn't use email, right? So we're going to email this out to all of our clients. We're going to, send it by Pony Express to those that's the only ones that they can, the only way we can get information to them. Okay, so we're striving for simultaneous. That's the goal, right? And to the extent that that's possible, we want to do it. Okay, but again, fair and equal are not necessarily the same thing. They are not the same thing, right? So we're going to strive for this idea of simultaneity in the way we make these changes known. Okay, but again, that's what we're striving for. It's not necessarily the standard itself. So we ought to have a list of clients and their holdings. Well, if we're going to change recommendations from buy to sell, and we want to be able to deal fairly with all of our clients, and there's some clients that hold this security in their portfolio, well, it would be nice to know, who those clients are. If we don't have a list of clients and their holdings, well, then we change our recommendation and we kind of, print it in the newspaper. And well, how do we? Well, it would be great if we had a list of clients and their holdings so we knew how and who this would be of interest to. Okay, again, we're going to disclose these trade allocation procedures. So how do we break up, hot issues? How do we deal with block trades? Those types of things. And then we're going to review accounts regularly to ensure fair client treatment. So there ought to be some sort of sampling, periodic review of client accounts to make sure that there's not some overly aggressive employee in the firm that is somehow protecting or benefiting a client to the disadvantage of all the other clients. Well, we need to have some sort of review process in order to be able to deal with that. And then finally here for fair dealing, okay, if the firm offers different levels of service, you should disclose that to everyone. So it ought to be disclosed in writing. Okay, and then of course this is something that was added not too long ago to the code and standards. There's a couple of acknowledgments to the idea that we're actually in this profession to make a living. And so deviations from a strict pro rata application of, say, an IPO shares is going to be acceptable. That doesn't mean that we can be biased. So, we have a wide range of clients of lots of different sizes. We get, 80,000 shares in an IPO, and that would mean that we would have to put 2.3 shares in this client's portfolio and 18.7 in this one, and 1,000 and 1,233 in this. Well, it doesn't have to be strictly pro rata. Okay, so we can say, look, we're not going to distribute any shares below 1. We're going to distribute even numbers of shares, those types of things. So you can have a reflection of the fact that we actually have to deal with clients and we actually have to distribute shares. Okay? But what the system that we come up with should be fair to all clients. It can't bias, disadvantage small clients. It may be that they don't get any participation in this time around, but maybe they get to participate some other time under some other system. So anyway, we don't have to have a strict pro rata allocation. Okay, there are some requirements of that. I guess just doing business actually requires us to get down and make some decisions. They allow that. Okay, again, the principle here is: are we being fair? Not are we being equal? So that's the idea of fair dealing.